Local Cape Town protests around the alarming levels of malnutrition, starvation in Gaza. The World Health Organization warning that there is a dangerous trajectory on which it goes to malnutrition-related deaths. 133 deaths from starvation. It's mostly children who are affected. 5,000 under fives admitted for outpatient malnutrition treatment since July or in July. This is separate from the 60,000 people that have been killed in Gaza over the last 2 years. Now, Israel has announced tactical pauses in 3 Gaza areas to allow for aid, establishing what it calls secure routes for UN and humanitarian convoys. They've also approved airdrops by foreign nations, the UAE, Jordan, dropping 28 packages on Sunday. But it has seen an ever-increasing call for humanitarian aid and also to a cessation of violence and the war in Gaza. More international criticism mounting. The UK, France, Germany says that these are man-made crises and they can be avoidable. But on Friday, I read a opinion piece by Faizal Dawjee in News 24. Faizal worked as a journalist in the killing fields of Bosnia between the 6th and 11th of July 1995, in the supposed safety of a UN-declared safe zone. More than 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys were systematically executed by Serb forces in Srebrenica. And Ishmael draws a commentary, but also a parallel between Srebrenica and Gaza. He says there are 2 grave sites, but one silence. He says that the concept, the European concept of when there is a Holocaust or where there is a massacre in Srebrenica, the call is never again. He says this is a lie. He argues that the slogan only applies when the victims are white, Western, and geopolitically useful. What does it mean for the rest of the world? And he joins me now on the line, Faizal Dawjee, former journalist, government communicator. Good morning, Faizal. Really appreciate your time. You draw the parallels between Srebrenica and Gaza. What prompted you to link these two sites of massacre and still in Gaza ongoing war? Are there specific moments or actions that for you mirror these 2 geographical places and the historic moments that we experience?
Good morning, Lester. Thanks for having me. I think the underlying theme of the article is that the mantra after 1948 was never again. And never again was about making sure that there was no further Holocaust, genocide against any community, any population, ever again. So whether it was in Europe, Africa, Middle East, all over the globe. So that was the fundamental pillar upon which the Genocide Convention was based on. But what Gaza and Srebrenica has shown is that when it comes to people of a different color or a religion or ethnicity, the call for never again rings very hollow. And these are preventable actions that can be taken. If you look at Bosnia, the war broke out in 1992. And by all indications, the Serb campaign against the Muslims was going to end up in a genocide, was going to end up in mass atrocities. And there were many signs, many indications that this was going to happen. The international community was wringing its hands. They were involved in diplomacy, negotiations. Fair enough, as you can take that as far as you can go. But you don't negotiate an end to genocide. You don't negotiate how to stop a genocide. You have to stop the genocide. There can be no negotiations around that. And so in Gaza, the talk now is about negotiating a settlement. Well, that rings hollow when every day hundreds of people are being killed. And so my view is that when it came to Bosnia, you had a religious community that was under threat. The UN had a protective force. It had a safe havens for Muslims, and it didn't protect anyone. In Gaza, you have the same problem. The international community, by its own standards, have betrayed the people of Palestine. So the genocide conventions mean absolutely nothing. But the more important point is that Western countries even refuse to use the word genocide. Because if they do, there are legal considerations that they have to take into account. Because once you declare it a genocide, then they have to make sure that they are not complicit in it. They have to stop. They have to implement sanctions and a variety of actions they have to take. They have done none of that.
Faizal,
I mean,
in both Bosnia and Gaza, you portray the United Nations as ineffective and complicit. Even though you have UN leaders like Antonio Guterres becoming quite strident about calling Gaza a genocide. You have the World Health Organization, a multilateral UN entity, calling on the concern around starvation. You have the Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian territories being quite strident on genocide in Gaza. So the leadership of the United Nations and multinational bodies quite strident. But what is happening in terms of the makeup, the composition of a body like the UN, and why you say that they've become ineffective and maybe even complicit in the deaths, particularly in Gaza of 60,000 people so far?
So the UN is made up of its member states, and the big five always have veto power. I mean, more than 70 UN resolutions have been passed against Israel since its establishment. Not one has been implemented. So every time it goes to the Security Council or General Assembly, it's been vetoed by the United States. And so it has no impact. There is no implementation of any UN resolution. So while the UN Secretary General and its officials all have made these statements condemning Israel, in the end, the killing continues. So at that point, it means nothing for the people on the other side of the Israeli bombs. So it is not only the UN. I mean, look at the role of the European Union. Look at the role of Germany. Look at the role of the UK. All of them are still supplying arms to Israel.
But is it more than just complicity on Western countries? South Africa leads an ICJ case against Israel. It is co-chair along with Colombia in what's known as the Hague Group. But South Africa continues to trade with Israel. It is a large export of coal, for example, from South Africa to Israel. Colombia as well. Coal goes to powering industries, maybe even industries that are connected to the Israeli Defense Force. Could then you also not draw a link that even though South Africa claims to be a moral voice for the Palestinian cause, it still continues to trade and thereby keeping up an IDF war machine that goes on to kill 60,000 people in Gaza? Faisal?
I think you are absolutely correct. I mean, we need to call out those governments, and especially our government also, for still maintaining trade relations with Israel. And I think civil society groups, lobby groups, Palestinian solidarity groups all need to put pressure. Even the trade unions need to put pressure on government to stop the trade with Israel. Otherwise, your action at the ICJ, again, rings hollow. So the government has an obligation to stop the trade. And the longer it takes, I mean, as civil society, then you begin to question, why would you go to the ICJ and not immediately stop trade with Israel? So that has to be done.
But does a trade union care? Of course, a trade union would care. But if the decision is, do you call on a embargo, or do you call on, we won't handle any goods that are associated with Israel here in South Africa? The opposite of that is Donald Trump and punitive tariffs, which on 30% alone runs the risk of shutting 100,000 jobs in South Africa. If you're asking industry, if you're asking trade unions, if you're asking South Africans to weigh up what is in the best immediate interest, where do you think the appetite is, Faizal?
Well, we have to go back to our own history. What did some of the trade unions do during the time of apartheid? Some of those European trade union movements took a stand against apartheid, went against their own governments. So there is precedent for that. And our trade union movements have a very good history in taking a position against Israel. Previously, they have stopped loading vessels to Israel. So that is there. We need to be much more robust in doing that. Especially, this is a genocide. Either you are going to do everything to prevent a genocide, not being complicit in a genocide, and not giving tacit approval for a genocide. So the moral position is there. And you would have noticed in the last week how governments have now changed their positions about the starvation and calling on Israel to stop and allow food to get in. Is it suddenly they had a moral jolt and got a conscience? No. We've been telling them all this while that there's a genocide taking place. The UN ICJ has said that there are plausible cause for genocide.
Faizal Dawjee, really appreciate your time. A former journalist, he worked on, particularly in Eastern Europe. He covered the Srebrenica massacre, writing in News 24 at the weekend. Really appreciate your time.